All right, we're sort of like in a sylvan part of the urban part of Minneapolis. So since we're kind of in a forest, let's talk about the little spruce technique in consecutive interpreting. I'm sure there's a more fancier name for it. Once I told my colleague Andre, and he said, yeah, I would call it blah, blah, blah. But what is this little spruce technique? Imagine a spruce, right? A spruce has many, many branches. And off of one branch, other branches branch out, and then mini branches, and then little needles, and so forth, right? You've all seen a spruce. And in fact, in Russian, we have a word, razlapisty, sprawling out, and it actually comes from the branches of the spruce. It sprawls out. So how can we use this in consecutive interpreting? I'm going to tell you a story. I love the book The Count of Monte Cristo. And in The Count of Monte Cristo, a guy gets falsely imprisoned, and he has like these several haters, and then he meets a prisoner, another prisoner, and he escapes and he finds a treasure, and it's a whole quest for his revenge and justice. And then he comes back to Paris, and then he takes his revenge on this guy and on this guy and on this guy. So if we were using the little spruce technique, what would it look like? Well, the trunk, the main storyline, is him seeking revenge or justice on these enemies of his. Okay, and then there are little branches that branch out. There's his love with Mercedes, and then there is his revenge against the prosecutor Villefort, and then there is his revenge against his nemesis Fernando de Mondego, I believe, and then there are little branches like him saving Fernando's son in order to not ingratiate but become friends with Fernando, and so forth, right? So if I'm interpreting and if I'm listening for this main tree trunk and the main branches and then the little branches, and then you populate the little needles, and it kind of makes it easier because you're not giving the same emphasis to the needles as to the tree trunk. And also something else happens. If you remember nothing else, you remember the trunk of the tree, right? I don't know, in the movie Outlander, it's this girl who lands in 18th century Scotland. And then you're like, oh, okay, and she also fell in love. Okay, and when she fell in love, it was, well, I forget he was Jamie, but who he was, a nobleman, but whatever. So once you're going with your main storyline, the mind just sort of brings the other branches back, and also the needles. I hope I'm not confusing you to no end, but I'm going to tell a story here. And once I tell a story, stop and try to interpret. And as you're listening to the story, maybe think of what these different branches are. So really quick, I've done 3 marathons. The first marathon was Twin Cities and also my last marathon. And the first marathon was very spontaneous. I called my former high school coach, Mr. Shandel, and I said, Mr. Shandel, how do I prepare in 3 weeks? And he said, you're crazy, but this is how. And I prepared, and I ran a decent time, which was 3:15, and it was sort of without a legal entry, but it was fun. And then my second one was in Las Vegas. I did not prepare well. I was actually a little bit chubby. I realized like almost halfway that I wasn't going to run any sort of a good time. I was going to actually quit until I saw a cute Canadian girl. I found out later she was Canadian, running with a group of men, and she was like their cheerleader or their muse. And she was like, come on over. So I ran with him, the men fell off, and we just finished together. You know, Tori, I think was her name, or Terry, or something of the sort. And then the last one was again Twin Cities, and I prepared better that time. And I ran something like a 2:51, which is definitely not world class, but it's okay, it's decent. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. So maybe stop the clip, try to interpret. The main storyline were these different little marathons, right? So that's a technique that you can use. Play around with it, have your friends or your family members tell you stories, and listen for the main storyline, the trunk of the tree, the main branches, and trust your mind that it will come up with the needles, quote unquote, the details in the right moment. And when you're listening, don't try to interpret in your head. That's a topic for a different clip, but listen, and your mind will bring the needles back on its own. Okay, crazy analogy, but hopefully it was helpful.